Death has a weird habit of showing up late, ruining plans, and rewriting civilization. Keep watching because some of history's biggest turns came from one body dropping at exactly the wrong moment. 1. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's death is the classic example of history tripping over a loose brick and falling into a world war. On June 28, 1914, he and his wife Sophie were shot in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. The bizarre part is that the day had already included a failed bomb attack, and the royal couple still continued the visit because apparently nearly exploded before lunch was not enough of a scheduling concern. Then their driver took a wrong turn, stopped near Princip, and history basically handed the assassin a second chance with gift wrapping. The killing triggered the July Crisis. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, alliances snapped into place, and World War I followed. One wrong turn helped collapse empires, redraw borders, and poison the 20th century. That is not bad luck. That is bad luck wearing a military uniform. 2. Alexander the Great conquered so much land that by age 32, he had built an empire stretching from Macedonia to the edges of India, which is impressive until you remember he left behind the world's worst succession plan. Basically, good luck, boys. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE after a sudden illness, and because he had no adult heir ready to rule, his generals immediately began fighting over the inheritance like relatives at the reading of a billionaire's will. His half-brother Philip III and unborn son Alexander IV were used as political chess pieces, but real power went to ambitious commanders. The result was the Wars of the Diadochi, decades of brutal conflict that shattered his empire into rival kingdoms. Egypt went to Ptolemy, much of Asia to Seleucus, and the dream of one giant Greek-Macedonian superstate died with Alexander. He conquered the world, then forgot to leave instructions. History's greatest military genius lost the post-game paperwork. 3. Ogedei Khan's death may be one of the strangest Europe got lucky moments in history. He was the son of Genghis Khan and the second great Khan of the Mongol Empire, and under his rule the Mongol war machine kept rolling like a medieval tank with excellent horse management. By 1241, Mongol armies had smashed into Eastern Europe, defeating forces in Poland at Legnica and Hungary at Mohi. Europe was not exactly giving "we have this under control" energy. Then Ogedei died on December 11, 1241. Soon after, the Mongol advance into Europe stopped and the armies withdrew, partly because Mongol princes and commanders had to deal with succession politics back home. Historians still debate how decisive his death was, but the timing was absurdly important. Imagine being a European king, watching the most terrifying army on earth approach, and then hearing, "Good news, their boss died, and now they have a meeting." Which strange death changed history the most? Drop your verdict before history drops another body. 4. King Harold II of England had already survived one brutal battle in October 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, arrived with another army. Exhausted but determined, Harold marched south after defeating the Norwegian invasion at Stamford Bridge. Then came the Battle of Hastings. According to later tradition, Harold was struck in the eye by an arrow before being cut down by Norman knights. Historians still debate the exact cause of his death, but there is no doubt that once Harold fell, English resistance collapsed. William claimed the throne, becoming William the Conqueror, and England changed forever. French became the language of the ruling elite, castles began rising across the countryside, and the legal system, government, and even the English language evolved under Norman influence. Thousands of everyday English words eventually blended with French vocabulary because one king never walked off that battlefield alive. Harold's death did not simply end a reign, it marked the beginning of a completely different England. One exhausted king fell in the mud, and an entire nation's future started speaking with a French accent. 5. Julius Caesar survived countless battles, pirate kidnappings, and political conspiracies. But in the end, the greatest general in Rome was defeated by men wearing togas instead of armor. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, a group of senators led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus surrounded Caesar during a Senate meeting and stabbed him 23 times. The conspirators believed they were saving the Roman Republic from dictatorship. Instead, they accelerated its collapse. Rather than restoring democracy, Caesar's assassination unleashed years of civil war. His adopted heir, Octavian, joined forces with Mark Antony before eventually defeating him as well. Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor, and the Roman Republic disappeared forever. Ironically, the senators who claimed they were defending liberty achieved exactly the opposite. Caesar's enemies succeeded in killing the man, but they failed to kill his political legacy. Rome exchanged elected leaders for emperors who ruled for centuries. History has a cruel sense of humor. The men who stabbed a dictator accidentally invented an empire. 6. Sometimes history changes because a president refuses to stay home. On April 14, 1865, just days after the American Civil War effectively ended, President Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington. Actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth slipped into the presidential box and shot Lincoln in the back of the head. The nation celebrated victory one moment and mourned its leader the next. Lincoln died the following morning, becoming the first U.S. president to be assassinated. His death dramatically altered Reconstruction, the difficult process of rebuilding the country after the Civil War. Vice President Andrew Johnson took office with very different priorities, creating bitter political battles that shaped race relations, civil rights, and American politics for generations. Many historians believe Reconstruction could have unfolded differently had Lincoln survived, though no one can know for certain. One bullet ended the life of the president who preserved the Union just as he prepared to rebuild it. Winning the war turned out to be easier than surviving the peace. 7 Rasputin became famous long before he died, but it was the unbelievable stories surrounding his death that turned him into a legend. The Siberian mystic gained enormous influence over Russia's royal family because Tsarina Alexandra believed he could ease the suffering of her son Alexei, who had hemophilia. By 1916, many Russian nobles blamed Rasputin for the empire's growing problems. A group led by Prince Felix Yusupov lured him to a palace in Petrograd, where they murdered him. Popular legends claim he survived poisoned cakes, poisoned wine, multiple gunshots, and even tried to escape before finally dying. Modern evidence suggests much of that dramatic tale was exaggerated, but the assassination itself is well documented. Ironically, killing Rasputin solved nothing. Just months later, the Russian Revolution swept away the Romanov dynasty entirely. The men who believed removing one mysterious advisor would save the monarchy instead watched the entire imperial system collapse. Rasputin's death became the final eerie chapter before one of history's biggest revolutions rewrote Russia forever. 8. When President William McKinley attended the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in September 1901, he wanted to meet ordinary Americans. Despite security concerns, he insisted on greeting visitors one by one. Among them stood anarchist Leon Czolgosz, hiding a revolver beneath a handkerchief wrapped around his hand. As McKinley reached out to shake hands, Czolgosz fired 2 shots. At first, doctors believed the president might recover, but infection developed, and he died 8 days later. His death elevated Vice President Theodore Roosevelt to the presidency at just 42 years old, making him the youngest president in American history at that time. Roosevelt transformed the office with aggressive trust-busting conservation policies and a more active American role on the world stage. It is difficult to imagine the progressive era unfolding exactly the same way without him. McKinley expected to spend a pleasant afternoon greeting citizens. Instead, a handshake changed American politics for decades. Sometimes history hides behind the friendliest smile in the crowd. 9 Emperor Commodus spent years turning Rome into something resembling his personal reality show. He fought staged gladiator battles, demanded worship as a living god, renamed months after himself, and believed the empire revolved entirely around his ego. Eventually, enough people decided they had seen enough. On the final day of AD 192, a conspiracy involving members of his inner circle succeeded in poisoning him. When that failed, his wrestling partner Narcissus strangled him in his bath. Commodus had no clear successor, and his death plunged Rome into the chaotic year of the 5 emperors. Rival generals fought for power while the stability established under earlier emperors quickly disappeared. Many historians view his assassination as one of the key moments marking the beginning of the empire's long decline. Rome did not collapse overnight, but the steady cracks became impossible to ignore. Commodus spent years pretending to be Hercules. In the end, the strongest man in the palace was the one holding him underwater. 10 Franz Reichelt believed he was about to revolutionize aviation. An Austrian-born tailor living in Paris, he designed what he hoped would become a wearable parachute suit, convinced it would save pilots escaping damaged aircraft. On February 4, 1912, he received permission to test his invention from the first platform of the Eiffel Tower. Officials expected him to use a dummy, but at the last moment, Reichelt insisted on making the jump himself. Friends tried to stop him, yet he remained completely confident. Cameras captured the entire event as he leaped from the tower. The parachute failed to deploy properly, and he fell to his death. His tragic experiment became one of the earliest widely filmed fatal accidents and sparked renewed attention toward proper parachute development and aviation safety testing. Future engineers increasingly relied on unmanned trials before risking human lives. Reichelt genuinely believed he would prove his critics wrong. Instead, his final leap became a lasting reminder that confidence and gravity have never been equal opponents. 11. In the summer of 1793, one bathtub became the stage for one of history's most famous political murders. Jean-Paul Marat, a leading figure of the French Revolution, spent much of his time soaking in medicinal baths because of a painful skin condition. On July 13th, a young woman named Charlotte Corday arrived at his home claiming she had important information about political enemies. Marat invited her inside and continued taking notes while sitting in the tub. Moments later, Corday pulled out a kitchen knife and stabbed him once in the chest. Marat died within minutes. Corday believed killing one radical leader would stop the bloodshed consuming France. Instead, she accomplished the exact opposite. Marat instantly became a revolutionary martyr. His funeral drew enormous crowds, artists immortalized him in famous paintings, and extremists used his death to justify even harsher violence during the Reign of Terror. Sometimes removing one voice doesn't calm the argument. Sometimes it gives that voice an eternal microphone that echoes louder than it ever did in life. 12 Emperor Pertinax ruled Rome for only 87 days, yet his death created one of the most embarrassing moments in imperial history. After the assassination of Commodus, Pertinax tried restoring discipline, especially among the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers assigned to protect the emperor. The guards had grown accustomed to generous rewards and little accountability, and they were not interested in military reform. On March 28, AD 193, a group of Praetorians stormed the imperial palace and murdered Pertinax despite his attempts to reason with them. Then came the truly unbelievable part. Instead of choosing a new emperor based on leadership or experience, the Praetorian Guard literally auctioned the Roman Empire to the highest bidder. A wealthy senator named Didius Julianus promised each guard an enormous payment and bought the throne. Romans reacted with outrage. Rival generals declared themselves emperor, and civil war quickly erupted. Imagine discovering your entire country had been sold like antique furniture at an estate sale. Pertinax's death proved that when greed becomes government policy, chaos usually signs the paperwork. 13. Thomas Becket and King Henry II of England began as close friends, but power has a remarkable ability to ruin even the strongest relationships. Henry appointed Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury, expecting complete loyalty. Instead, Becket fiercely defended the independence of the church against royal authority. Years of bitter arguments followed until, in 1170, an angry Henry reportedly exclaimed words that were interpreted by 4 knights as a command to solve the problem. They rode to Canterbury Cathedral, confronted Becket during evening prayers, and brutally killed him at the altar. The murder horrified Christian Europe. Rather than strengthening Henry's authority, it destroyed his reputation. Becket was declared a saint within just 3 years. Pilgrims flocked to his shrine for centuries, and Henry himself performed public penance, allowing monks to whip him as an act of repentance. The king wanted a more obedient archbishop. Instead, he accidentally created one of medieval Europe's most famous saints. History has little sympathy for rulers who confuse frustration with good decision-making. 14 King Gustav III of Sweden loved theater almost as much as politics, which made the setting of his death feel strangely poetic. On March 16, 1792, the king attended a grand masked ball at the Royal Opera House in Stockholm. Everyone wore elaborate costumes, making it nearly impossible to distinguish friends from enemies. During the evening, a conspirator named Jakob Johan Ankarström approached Gustav from behind and shot him in the back. The king did not die immediately, but lingered for nearly 2 weeks before succumbing to infection. Gustav's assassination weakened the Swedish monarchy during an already unstable period. His young son inherited the throne under a regency, while political divisions deepened across the kingdom. The dramatic murder later inspired Giuseppe Verdi's famous opera Un ballo in maschera, ensuring Gustav's final night would live on both in history books and on opera stages. He attended the ball expecting music, laughter, and elegant conversation. Instead, the evening's final performance became one that audiences have remembered for more than 2 centuries. 15 Spencer Perceval remains the only British Prime Minister ever assassinated, yet surprisingly, few people know his name today. On May 11, 1812, Percival entered the lobby of the House of Commons as he had done countless times before. Waiting nearby was a Liverpool merchant named John Bellingham, who blamed the British government for personal financial losses suffered during imprisonment in Russia. Believing he had been denied justice, Bellingham pulled out a pistol and shot Percival in the chest at close range. The Prime Minister died within minutes. Britain was deeply involved in the Napoleonic Wars, making the assassination especially shocking. Parliament continued functioning, and Lord Liverpool soon became Prime Minister, but the event prompted lasting changes in security around government officials. Bellingham never attempted to escape and calmly accepted arrest, insisting he had acted fairly. History remembers Percival less for his political achievements than for the astonishing fact that Britain's only assassinated Prime Minister died not on a battlefield or foreign mission, but walking into work like any ordinary morning. 16. The death of President James A. Garfield is one of history's cruelest examples of how medicine can become more dangerous than the original injury. On July 2, 1881, Garfield was shot by Charles Guiteau in a Washington train station. Remarkably, the bullets themselves were not immediately fatal. Modern doctors believe Garfield likely could have survived. Instead, physicians repeatedly inserted unsterilized fingers and medical instruments into the wound while searching for the bullet, unknowingly introducing severe infection. For more than 2 months, the president suffered through painful treatments before finally dying on September 19th. His death shocked Americans and highlighted the urgent need for better medical practices, although acceptance of antiseptic techniques still took time. Politically, Garfield's assassination also strengthened demands for civil service reform, eventually leading to the Pendleton Act, which reduced the spoils system in federal government hiring. Guiteau believed shooting one man would somehow unite political factions. Instead, he accidentally helped modernize both government employment and public awareness of safer medical care. 17 Leon Trotsky had survived exile, revolution, and civil war, but even thousands of miles from Moscow, he could not escape Joseph Stalin's reach. After losing the power struggle inside the Soviet Union, Trotsky eventually settled in Mexico, where he lived under heavy security. On August 20, 1940, a Spanish communist agent named Ramon Mercader gained access to Trotsky's home by pretending to seek advice on a political article. As Trotsky read the papers, Mercader struck him in the head with a mountaineering ice axe. Remarkably, Trotsky did not die instantly. He fought back, shouted for help, and lived until the following day. His death eliminated Stalin's most famous rival and symbolized the Soviet leader's willingness to pursue enemies anywhere in the world. Even exile offered no protection from political revenge. The murder also became one of the Cold War's most infamous intelligence operations, reminding governments everywhere that ideological battles rarely respected national borders. Trotsky escaped one revolution after another, but not the man who inherited it. 18 Dutch Prime Minister Johan de Witt experienced one of the most horrifying deaths ever inflicted on a political leader. In 1672, known in Dutch history as the Disaster Year, the Netherlands faced invasion from multiple foreign powers. Many citizens blamed de Witt and his brother Cornelis for the country's military setbacks. Political tensions reached a boiling point on August 20th when an enraged mob seized both brothers outside a prison in The Hague. They were beaten, shot, and brutally lynched before the crowd mutilated their bodies in scenes almost impossible to comprehend today. Their deaths marked the collapse of the Republican government they represented and strengthened the position of William III of Orange, who soon became the dominant political figure in the Dutch Republic. William would later become King of England during the Glorious Revolution, influencing British and European history for generations. The mob believed it was punishing failed leaders. Instead, it unintentionally helped elevate a future king whose influence stretched far beyond the Netherlands. 19 is sometimes a single scientist dies before finishing the work that could have changed medicine even sooner. Alexander Bogdanov was a Russian physician, philosopher, and revolutionary fascinated by blood transfusions. During the 1920s, he believed exchanging blood might slow aging and improve health. Some of his experiments appeared successful, encouraging him to continue. In 1928, however, Bogdanov performed another transfusion using blood from a young student who unknowingly carried malaria and possibly tuberculosis. Instead of becoming healthier, Bogdanov developed severe complications and died within days. His death shocked Soviet medical researchers and highlighted the enormous risks involved in early transfusion science before modern blood testing existed. Although his theories about rejuvenation proved misguided, the tragedy encouraged greater attention to donor screening and safer medical procedures. Scientific progress has often demanded courage, but history repeatedly reminds us that courage without sufficient evidence can become incredibly expensive. Bogdanov hoped to discover the secret of extending life. Instead, his final experiment became a lesson in why medicine must always respect caution as much as curiosity. Bruce Lee's death in 1973 stunned the world because the man seemed almost impossible to defeat. At just 32 years old, he had transformed martial arts, broken barriers for Asian actors in Hollywood, and inspired millions with his speed, discipline, and philosophy. On July 20th, while visiting actress Betty Ting Pei in Hong Kong, Lee developed a severe headache and took a painkiller containing meprobamate. He later lay down to rest, but never woke up. An official inquest concluded that he died from cerebral edema, or swelling of the brain, likely caused by a reaction to the medication. Decades later, doctors and historians have continued debating the precise medical explanation, but no evidence has overturned the conclusion that his death resulted from natural medical causes rather than the endless conspiracy theories that followed. His sudden passing froze his image in time and turned him into a global legend whose influence only grew after his death. Bruce Lee spent his career proving the human body could accomplish extraordinary things. Ironically, the greatest martial artist of his generation was defeated by something no amount of training could fight. 21. Sometimes the death that changes history isn't the victims at all. In 1878, Princess Alice, the daughter of Queen Victoria, was caring for her family during a devastating outbreak of diphtheria at their home in Darmstadt. One by one, her children became ill. After weeks of exhaustion, she comforted her young son Ernst, who had been forbidden from kissing anyone to avoid infection. When he broke down in tears after learning that his little sister Marie had died, Alice forgot every medical precaution. She hugged him tightly and kissed him. Within days, she developed symptoms herself and died on December 14th, the anniversary of her father, Prince Albert's death. Her passing deeply affected Queen Victoria, who never truly recovered emotionally. The tragedy also highlighted the terrifying reality of infectious diseases before antibiotics and widespread vaccination. In royal families, wealth could buy palaces, jewels, and armies, but it could not stop microscopic bacteria. Alice died doing what every loving mother would have done. History rarely offers a more heartbreaking reminder that love sometimes ignores danger. 22. King Alexander I of Greece never expected that one curious monkey would alter the future of an entire nation. In October 1920, while walking through the royal gardens outside Athens, Alexander tried to separate his German shepherd from a pet Barbary macaque. The monkey attacked, biting the king several times on his leg and torso. At first, the wounds seemed minor, but infection quickly spread. Antibiotics did not yet exist, and despite surgery, Alexander developed severe sepsis. He died just weeks later at only 27 years old. His unexpected death triggered a political crisis that changed Greece's leadership. His father, King Constantine I, returned to the throne, leading to decisions that contributed to the disastrous Greco-Turkish War. Some historians have even called Alexander's death one of history's strangest turning points, because the consequences extended far beyond one royal family. Winston Churchill later remarked that perhaps 250,000 people died because of that monkey bite, though historians debate the exact scale of its impact. Either way, it remains one of history's most astonishing examples of how an ordinary afternoon can send an entire country in a different direction. 23 few deaths have inspired as many legends as that of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. When the musical genius died in Vienna in December 1791 at just 35 years old, rumors immediately began spreading that he had been poisoned by a jealous rival, especially fellow composer Antonio Salieri. The story became so popular that books, plays, and movies repeated it for generations. Modern historians, however, have found no convincing evidence that Mozart was murdered. Instead, researchers believe he likely died from illness, possibly related to rheumatic fever or a severe infection, although the exact cause remains uncertain. Yet, even without foul play, his death dramatically changed the world of music. He left behind unfinished masterpieces, including the famous Requiem, which others completed after his passing. His reputation grew enormously in the decades that followed, influencing composers from Beethoven to Tchaikovsky. Mozart spent much of his life struggling financially, despite his extraordinary talent. Ironically, the fame that turned him into one of history's greatest composers truly exploded only after he was gone. Sometimes the loudest applause arrives far too late. 24. In February 1546, Martin Luther traveled to his hometown of Eisleben hoping to settle a dispute between local nobles. Instead, the aging reformer became seriously ill and died shortly afterward at the age of 62. Luther had already challenged the authority of the Catholic Church decades earlier by publishing his 95 Theses, helping ignite the Protestant Reformation. His death did not end the movement he had started. If anything, it solidified it. Without Luther's commanding personality dominating debates, Protestant churches continued developing independently across Europe. Political leaders increasingly embraced religious reform, reshaping alliances, education, and even national identities. Europe entered generations of religious conflict, but it also witnessed enormous cultural and intellectual change fueled partly by ideas Luther had championed. The printing press spread his writings farther than he could ever have imagined. Luther did not invent religious disagreement, but his life and death permanently altered Christianity. One monk challenged centuries of tradition, and when he finally closed his eyes, millions continued reading the pages he had already written. 25 Mahatma Gandhi survived prison, political battles, and decades of resistance against British rule, only to be killed after achieving the independence he had fought for. On January 30, 1948, Gandhi was walking to an evening prayer meeting in New Delhi when Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist, stepped forward and fired 3 shots at close range. Gandhi died almost instantly. His assassination shocked India and the entire world. Instead of weakening his message of nonviolence, it strengthened it. Millions mourned his death, while India's government moved quickly against extremist organizations linked to political violence. Internationally, Gandhi became an enduring symbol of peaceful resistance, inspiring future leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. Godse believed eliminating Gandhi would strengthen his political cause. History reached the opposite conclusion. Gandhi's ideas became more influential after his death than they had ever been during his life. It is one of history's greatest ironies that a man who refused violence became one of violence's most powerful arguments against itself. 26. President John F. Kennedy's assassination remains one of the defining moments of the 20th century. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy rode through Dallas, Texas in an open convertible as thousands of people lined the streets. Shots rang out from above, fatally wounding the president. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested and officially identified as the assassin, though countless conspiracy theories have continued for decades. Kennedy's death stunned Americans watching television coverage unfold almost in real time. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One within hours, ensuring continuity of government during an unimaginable crisis. Johnson soon pushed through landmark civil rights legislation that Kennedy had supported, while also dramatically expanding American involvement in Vietnam. The assassination permanently changed presidential security, ending the era of casual public access that earlier presidents had often enjoyed. One motorcade transformed not only American politics, but also how citizens viewed their leaders. After Dallas, the presidency never again looked quite as approachable from the sidewalk. 27 Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the United Nations, dedicated his career to preventing international conflicts from becoming global disasters. In September 1961, he boarded a DC-6 aircraft bound for northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, hoping to negotiate peace during the Congo crisis. The plane crashed near Ndola shortly before landing, killing Hammarskjöld and almost everyone aboard. For decades, questions surrounded the accident. Investigations have explored possibilities ranging from pilot error to mechanical failure, and even the possibility that the aircraft was attacked, though no definitive conclusion has been universally accepted. Hammarskjöld's death deprived the United Nations of one of its most respected diplomats during one of the Cold War's most dangerous periods. He was later awarded the Nobel Peace Prize posthumously, the only person ever to receive it after death under those circumstances. His final mission reflected his entire career, risking personal safety in pursuit of peace. Sometimes history remembers not only how someone died, but also exactly what they were trying to prevent. 28 Abraham Ortelius once described maps as frozen history, but Ferdinand Magellan's death proved that exploration itself could reshape the world. In April 1521, during his expedition to circumnavigate the globe, Magellan became involved in a local conflict on Mactan Island in the Philippines. Believing European weapons guaranteed victory, he attacked with a relatively small force. Instead, local warriors led by Lapu-Lapu overwhelmed the invaders. Magellan was killed on the beach, never completing the voyage he had begun. Ironically, his expedition continued without him. Under the command of Juan Sebastián Elcano, one surviving ship eventually returned to Spain in 1522, completing the first circumnavigation of Earth. The journey transformed geography, navigation, and European understanding of the planet. Magellan never saw the success that made his expedition legendary. He sailed farther than almost anyone of his era, only to fall within sight of a shoreline he expected to dominate. Sometimes explorers discover that the greatest obstacle isn't the ocean, it's believing every destination will welcome your arrival. 29 Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of ancient Egypt, chose death over humiliation after losing everything she had fought to preserve. In 30 BCE, following the defeat of her forces and those of Mark Antony by Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus captured Alexandria. Antony died after mistakenly believing Cleopatra had already taken her own life. Soon afterward, Cleopatra also died while under Roman custody. Ancient writers claimed she allowed an asp to bite her, although modern historians continue debating whether poison delivered in another way is more likely. Whatever the exact method, her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic kingdom and the beginning of Egypt as a Roman province. One of the wealthiest and most powerful civilizations on Earth lost its independence with the death of its queen. Octavian emerged victorious and soon became Rome's first emperor. Cleopatra's final decision closed the final chapter of pharaonic Egypt. Sometimes an empire ends not with a battle, but with the silence that follows one ruler's final breath. 30 Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space in 1961, instantly turning into one of the Soviet Union's greatest heroes. The world expected him to spend the rest of his life giving speeches and smiling for cameras. Instead, Gagarin insisted on remaining an active pilot. On March 27, 1968, while flying a routine training mission in a MiG-15 jet with instructor Vladimir Seryogin, the aircraft crashed, killing both men. For years, the Soviet government released very little information, fueling endless speculation about what had happened. Later investigations suggested the crew likely made a sudden evasive maneuver that caused the aircraft to enter an unrecoverable spin, although debate continued for decades. Gagarin's death shocked the global space community and reminded everyone that even after surviving the unimaginable dangers of spaceflight, ordinary aviation could still be deadly. The man who safely orbited Earth at 17,000 miles per hour ultimately lost his life during a routine training flight much closer to home. History has an unsettling habit of saving its strangest endings for its greatest pioneers. 31. Sometimes history changes because one scientist refuses to leave his laboratory. That was the fate of Marie Curie, the pioneering physicist and chemist whose discoveries transformed medicine forever. Alongside her husband Pierre, Curie discovered the radioactive elements polonium and radium, opening an entirely new field of science. During World War I, she even organized mobile X-ray units that helped doctors locate bullets and broken bones on the battlefield, saving countless lives. But in the early 20th century, almost nobody understood the long-term dangers of radiation. Curie regularly handled radioactive materials with her bare hands and even carried glowing samples in her pockets because she admired their beautiful blue light. Decades of exposure slowly damaged her body, and in 1934 she died from a plastic anemia caused by prolonged radiation exposure. Her notebooks remain so radioactive that they are still stored in lead-lined boxes today. Curie spent her life unlocking nature's hidden powers, never realizing those same discoveries were quietly shortening her own life. Few people have sacrificed so much to push science forward. 32 Benito Mussolini spent more than 20 years convincing Italians that he was the unstoppable face of fascism. By the spring of 1945, that illusion had completely collapsed. As Allied forces advanced and Italy crumbled, Mussolini attempted to escape toward Switzerland disguised among retreating German troops. He was recognized, captured by Italian partisans, and executed on April 28 alongside his companion Clara Petacci. The following day, their bodies were transported to Milan and hung upside down in Piazzale Loreto, where angry crowds gathered to insult and strike the corpses. The images shocked the world and symbolized the complete destruction of fascist Italy. Mussolini's death removed one of Europe's longest-serving dictators and marked the final collapse of his regime. Within days, Adolf Hitler would take his own life in Berlin, and Nazi Germany would soon surrender. Mussolini had spent years demanding public displays of loyalty and admiration. In the end, history gave him one final public appearance, but it looked nothing like the one he had imagined. 33 Adolf Hitler's death did not save the Third Reich because by April 1945, it was already collapsing under the weight of military defeat. Soviet troops had surrounded Berlin, Allied armies were advancing from the west, and Germany had little chance of continuing the war. On April 30th, inside the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler married Eva Braun before the two took their own lives only hours later. Their bodies were carried outside and burned according to Hitler's instructions to prevent public display similar to Mussolini's fate. His suicide effectively ended centralized Nazi leadership and cleared the way for Germany's unconditional surrender just days later. Europe celebrated the approaching end of 6 years of devastating war that had claimed tens of millions of lives. Hitler had promised a 1,000-year empire that lasted barely 12 years. He dragged an entire continent into catastrophe, only to disappear underground as everything around him collapsed. History remembers the empire he promised far less than the destruction he actually delivered. 34 Ernesto Che Guevara dreamed of exporting revolution across the world, believing small groups of determined fighters could ignite uprisings against governments everywhere. After helping Fidel Castro seize power in Cuba, Che left comfortable political positions behind to pursue new revolutions abroad. His final campaign took him to Bolivia, where support from local communities never materialized the way he had expected. In October 1967, Bolivian soldiers captured Guevara after a firefight in the mountains. The following day, he was executed in a small village schoolhouse. Ironically, his death accomplished something his final campaign could not. The famous photograph of his body, displayed publicly to prove he was dead, transformed him into a global revolutionary icon. His face eventually appeared on posters, t-shirts, and murals around the world, becoming one of history's most recognizable images. Many people today recognize Che's portrait without knowing anything about the failed campaign that ended his life. He lost the battle in Bolivia, but his image became impossible to defeat. 35 Steve Biko never commanded an army or held political office, yet his death became one of the defining moments in the struggle against apartheid. Biko founded the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa, encouraging Black South Africans to reject fear and psychological oppression imposed by the apartheid system. In August 1977, security police arrested him under harsh security laws. During interrogation, Biko suffered severe head injuries after being beaten. Despite his critical condition, authorities transported him hundreds of miles in the back of a police vehicle without proper medical treatment. He died on September 12th in prison. Government officials initially claimed he had died from a hunger strike, but the truth gradually emerged, provoking outrage both inside South Africa and internationally. His death intensified global criticism of apartheid and increased pressure for economic sanctions against the South African government. Biko spent his life urging people not to surrender their dignity. His death ensured that millions around the world finally paid attention to the system he had spent years exposing. 36. Sometimes the death that changes history belongs to a journalist instead of a politician. Daniel Pearl, an American reporter for the Wall Street Journal, traveled to Pakistan in early 2002 while investigating extremist networks following the September 11th attacks. During his reporting, he was kidnapped by militants who falsely accused him of espionage. Weeks later, Pearl was murdered, and the killers released a horrific video intended to spread fear around the world. Instead of silencing investigative journalism, his death reinforced the extraordinary risks reporters face while covering terrorism, war, and organized violence. Governments strengthened efforts to protect journalists working in dangerous regions, while Pearl became an enduring symbol of press freedom. His family later established organizations promoting dialogue, education, and cross-cultural understanding rather than revenge. Pearl believed that asking difficult questions mattered, even when the answers were dangerous. His murder reminded the world that truth often carries a higher price than headlines alone can ever reveal. The pen is powerful, but history repeatedly shows that some people fear questions more than weapons. 37 Abraham Zapruder never intended to become part of history. On November 22, 1963, the Dallas clothing manufacturer brought his home movie camera to record President John F. Kennedy's motorcade. Standing on a concrete pedestal overlooking Dealey Plaza, Zapruder captured just 26 seconds of film. Those few moments became the single most studied piece of footage in modern history after Kennedy was assassinated before his lens. Although Zapruder himself did not die that day, Another death connected to the film changed history in an unexpected way. The assassination transformed television journalism, forensic investigations, and public expectations of government transparency. The film became central evidence examined by investigators, historians, and researchers for decades. Kennedy's death also fueled endless debates because millions could repeatedly watch the event frame by frame. Before 1963, most people experienced history through newspapers. After Dallas, they increasingly experienced it through moving images. One ordinary citizen pressed the record button at exactly the right moment, and history has been replaying those 26 seconds ever since. 38 Indira Gandhi led India through some of its most turbulent decades, but one of her own decisions ultimately contributed to her assassination. In 1984, she ordered Operation Blue Star, sending the Indian Army into the Golden Temple in Amritsar to remove heavily armed Sikh militants. Although the operation succeeded militarily, it deeply angered many Sikhs around the world because the temple is their holiest shrine. On October 31, 1984, two of Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards assassinated her as she walked through the garden of her official residence in New Delhi. Her death triggered horrific anti-Sikh riots that claimed thousands of lives and left deep scars across India. Her son, Rajiv Gandhi, quickly became prime minister, continuing the political influence of the Nehru-Gandhi family. Indira Gandhi had survived wars, political crises, and years of opposition. Yet the greatest danger came from within her own security detail. Few tragedies better illustrate how decisions made in government offices can return in ways no leader expects. 39 Martin Luther King Jr. spent years preaching nonviolence while facing constant threats against his life. On April 4, 1968, he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had traveled to support striking sanitation workers. A single rifle shot struck him, and despite desperate medical efforts, King died that evening. His assassination sparked grief and unrest across dozens of American cities, but it also accelerated momentum behind the civil rights movement he had led. Just days later, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, outlawing discrimination in housing, one of King's long-standing goals. His speeches, especially "I Have a Dream," became defining statements about equality and justice far beyond the United States. James Earl Ray was convicted of the murder, though debate and conspiracy theories continued for years afterward. King's enemies believed killing one man would weaken a movement. Instead, his words became stronger than ever. Bullets can silence a voice, but they have an astonishingly poor record against ideas. 40 Princess Diana's death on August 31, 1997 became one of the most watched and emotionally powerful events in modern history. Diana and Dodi Fayed were traveling through Paris when their car crashed inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel while attempting to escape pursuing photographers. Diana died several hours later despite extensive medical treatment. Her death triggered an extraordinary global outpouring of grief. Millions left flowers outside Kensington Palace, television networks interrupted normal programming for days, and governments around the world expressed condolences. Public criticism also focused intensely on aggressive paparazzi practices, leading to renewed debates about privacy laws, media ethics, and the treatment of public figures. The British royal family faced unprecedented pressure to respond publicly, permanently changing how the monarchy communicated with ordinary people. Diana had often been called the People's Princess, and her death proved that title was more than a media slogan. She transformed public expectations of royalty during her life, and even after her death, the relationship between celebrities, the press, and the public was never quite the same again. 41. Sometimes one death changes science more than politics. Charles Darwin spent decades carefully collecting evidence before publishing On the Origin of Species in 1859, fundamentally changing humanity's understanding of life on Earth. By the time he died in 1882, evolution through natural selection had become one of the most influential scientific ideas ever proposed, though it remained controversial. What surprised many people was what happened after his death. Despite fierce opposition from some religious groups during his lifetime, Darwin received one of Britain's greatest honors by being buried in Westminster Abbey, just a few feet from Isaac Newton. The burial symbolized how dramatically public opinion had shifted. The man once accused of challenging centuries of traditional belief was now recognized as one of the nation's greatest scientists. His death effectively ended the debate over whether his work deserved serious scientific recognition. Arguments about evolution certainly continued, but Darwin himself had already won the larger battle. Few funerals have represented such a dramatic victory of evidence over controversy. 42 King Richard the Lionheart earned his legendary reputation fighting across Europe and the Middle East during the Crusades, yet his life ended because of one remarkably small castle. In 1199, while besieging the fortress of Châlus-Chabrol in France over a disputed treasure, Richard personally inspected the enemy's defenses without wearing full armor. A crossbow bolt struck him in the shoulder. At first, the wound seemed survivable, but infection quickly developed. Medieval medicine offered little help, and gangrene spread through his body. Richard died less than 2 weeks later. His passing dramatically altered English and French history. His younger brother John inherited the throne, and John's disastrous reign eventually led to the signing of Magna Carta, one of history's most important constitutional documents. Richard spent most of his reign abroad earning fame as a warrior king, only to lose his life over a relatively minor military operation. He survived countless battles against powerful armies, but ultimately fell to one well-aimed crossbow bolt fired from a small castle wall. 43. When Christopher Marlowe died in 1593, England lost one of its brightest playwrights almost overnight. Marlowe had already written groundbreaking works such as Dr. Faustus and Tamburlaine, inspiring a new generation of dramatists with bold language and unforgettable characters. Then, at just 29 years old, he was killed during an argument in a house at Deptford. According to the official account, a dispute over the bill for food and drink escalated into violence, and Marlowe was stabbed above the eye. Historians have debated the circumstances ever since, suggesting everything from espionage to political conspiracy, though no theory has been conclusively proven. His death left the English stage suddenly missing one of its greatest talents, just as William Shakespeare's career was accelerating. Many literary historians believe Marlowe might have become Shakespeare's greatest rival, had he lived longer. Instead, English literature took a different path. One tavern argument, or perhaps something far more complicated, permanently reshaped the future of Renaissance drama. 44 Emperor Frederick III of Germany ruled for only 99 days, making his death one of Europe's greatest political turning points. Frederick became German emperor in March 1888, while already suffering from advanced throat cancer. Many contemporaries believed he held liberal political views that could have softened Germany's increasingly militaristic direction. Unfortunately, he was too ill to govern effectively and died in June that same year. His son, Wilhelm II, immediately inherited the throne. Unlike his father, Wilhelm pursued a far more aggressive foreign policy, expanding Germany's navy and contributing to growing international tensions before the First World War. Historians still debate how different Europe might have looked had Frederick enjoyed a long reign. While no one can rewrite history with certainty, many agree that his early death removed a potentially moderating influence at a critical moment. Frederick spent decades preparing to rule but received barely 3 months on the throne. Sometimes history changes not because of dramatic decisions, but because someone simply runs out of time. 45 Franklin D. Roosevelt had guided the United States through the Great Depression and almost the entire Second World War, becoming the only American president elected to 4 terms. By early 1945, however, years of relentless pressure had taken a visible toll on his health. On April 12th, while relaxing at Warm Springs, Georgia, Roosevelt suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage and died suddenly. Vice President Harry Truman, who had served only a few months and had limited access to wartime secrets, unexpectedly became president. Truman inherited enormous responsibilities almost overnight, including overseeing the final months of World War II and making the historic decision to authorize the use of atomic bombs against Japan. Roosevelt's death, therefore, placed one of the most consequential presidential decisions in American history into different hands. Few leadership transitions have occurred under greater pressure. Roosevelt had spent 12 years carrying the weight of a nation through crisis. In the end, history handed the final chapter of the war to a man who had barely unpacked his office. 46 Joseph Stalin survived revolution, civil war, assassination attempts, and the largest conflict in human history. Yet his final enemy was his own failing health. In early March 1953, Stalin suffered a severe stroke at his country residence outside Moscow. Members of his inner circle reportedly hesitated before seeking medical help, partly because years of political purges had created an atmosphere where everyone feared making the wrong decision. Stalin died several days later. His passing immediately transformed global politics. A fierce power struggle followed inside the Soviet leadership before Nikita Khrushchev gradually emerged as the dominant figure. Within a few years, Khrushchev publicly condemned many of Stalin's crimes during his famous secret speech, beginning a process of de-Stalinization that reshaped the Soviet Union and influenced the entire Cold War. Stalin had ruled through fear so effectively that even his closest associates became afraid to act while he lay dying. Few dictators have built systems so intimidating that hesitation itself became part of their final story. 47 General George S. Patton survived some of the fiercest fighting of World War II while commanding American forces across North Africa and Europe. His tanks crossed battlefields where thousands of soldiers lost their lives, yet Patton repeatedly escaped serious injury. After Germany surrendered, many expected the legendary commander to spend years writing memoirs and shaping military policy. Instead, on December 9, 1945, Patton's car collided with a U.S. Army truck near Mannheim, Germany. Although everyone else in the vehicle suffered relatively minor injuries, Patton broke his neck and became paralyzed. He died 12 days later from complications. The irony was impossible to ignore. A man who had survived artillery fire, aerial attacks, and countless frontline inspections was fatally injured during a routine drive after the war had already ended. His death deprived the United States Army of one of its most experienced commanders, just as the post-war world was beginning to take shape. Sometimes peace proves more dangerous than war itself. 48. Pope John Paul I became one of history's shortest-serving popes, leading the Catholic Church for only 33 days in 1978. Elected after the death of Pope Paul VI, he quickly earned widespread affection because of his humility, warm personality, and approachable style. Then, on the morning of September 29th, he was found dead in his bed at the Vatican after suffering what was officially identified as a heart attack. His sudden death shocked Catholics around the world and almost immediately generated countless conspiracy theories involving secret societies, Vatican finances, and murder. Despite decades of speculation, no credible evidence has ever confirmed those extraordinary claims, and historians continue to regard natural causes as the most likely explanation. Nevertheless, his unexpected passing led to another papal election only weeks later, bringing Cardinal Karol Wojtyła to the throne as John Paul II. That decision reshaped modern Catholic history for more than a quarter of a century. Sometimes history changes simply because one remarkably short chapter ends before anyone expects it. 49 Steve Jobs spent years transforming personal computers, music players, smartphones, and digital entertainment, fundamentally changing everyday life for billions of people. Diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor in 2003, Jobs initially delayed conventional surgery while exploring alternative approaches before eventually undergoing treatment. Although he returned to lead Apple through some of its most innovative years, his health gradually declined. He died on October 5, 2011, at the age of 56. His passing marked the end of one of the most influential careers in modern technology. Apple continued growing under Tim Cook, but Jobs' unique combination of perfectionism, intuition, and relentless product vision became impossible to replace completely. Around the world, tributes poured in not only from technology companies, but also from artists, educators, entrepreneurs, and ordinary users whose daily lives had been transformed by devices he helped create. Jobs often said that remembering death helped him focus on what truly mattered. In the end, the products outlived the man who insisted they should change the world. 50 Queen Elizabeth I ruled England for 44 remarkable years, overseeing the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the flourishing of English theater, and the rise of England as a major European power. Yet when she died peacefully in March 1603 without children, her greatest influence began after her final breath. Because the Tudor dynasty had no direct heir, the English crown passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. For the first time, England and Scotland shared the same monarch, laying the political foundation that would eventually lead to the creation of Great Britain. The peaceful transfer of power also avoided the devastating succession wars that many people had feared for decades. Elizabeth had spent much of her reign refusing to marry because she wanted complete control over her kingdom. Ironically, by leaving no children, she unintentionally united two crowns through a distant family connection. One queen's quiet death permanently reshaped the political map of the British Isles, proving that sometimes the most important decision a ruler makes is the one history makes after they are gone. 51 Alexander Fleming's death did not dramatically alter history in the way an assassination might, but his life and passing marked the end of one of medicine's greatest revolutions. In 1928, Fleming famously noticed that mold contaminating one of his laboratory dishes had killed the surrounding bacteria. That accidental observation eventually led to the development of penicillin, the world's first widely successful antibiotic. Millions of soldiers wounded during World War II survived because infections that had once been fatal suddenly became treatable. Countless children reached adulthood thanks to antibiotics that traced their origins back to Fleming's discovery. When he died of a heart attack in London in 1955, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. By then, his work had already changed life expectancy around the world. It is difficult to imagine modern surgery, emergency medicine, or even routine dental procedures without antibiotics. Fleming spent his career studying tiny organisms invisible to the naked eye. Ironically, those microscopic discoveries became one of humanity's biggest victories over death itself. 52 Patrice Lumumba served as the first prime minister of the newly independent Republic of the Congo for only a few months, but his death reshaped African politics during the Cold War. After Congo gained independence from Belgium in 1960, the young nation immediately descended into political chaos, regional rebellions, and international interference. Lumumba's outspoken nationalism alarmed both Western governments and political rivals inside Congo. He was arrested, transferred to the secessionist province of Katanga, and executed on January 17, 1961. His death remained surrounded by secrecy for years, while later investigations confirmed the involvement of Congolese opponents supported by foreign interests. Lumumba quickly became a symbol of anti-colonial resistance throughout Africa and the developing world. Streets, universities, and monuments were named in his honor across multiple countries. His assassination also intensified Cold War competition across Africa, as global powers sought influence over newly independent nations. Lumumba governed for only a brief moment, yet his death echoed through African politics for generations, far longer than his time in office ever did. 53 Abraham Lincoln was not the only American president whose death reshaped the nation during wartime. When Franklin Roosevelt died in April 1945, Vice President Harry Truman suddenly inherited one of the greatest military and diplomatic responsibilities in history. Yet another enormous turning point followed only months later with the death of Japanese Emperor Hirohito's closest wartime advisors and military leaders during Japan's collapse. Although Hirohito himself survived, the suicides of senior Japanese officials, including War Minister Korochika Anami after Japan accepted surrender, symbolized the end of Imperial Japan's military leadership. Anami had opposed surrender, but ultimately obeyed the emperor's decision before taking his own life according to traditional samurai ideals. His death helped prevent a larger military revolt that could have prolonged the Pacific War. Historians believe that widespread resistance within the Japanese army might have continued without leaders willing to accept defeat. Sometimes one person's final act is not about changing history, but preventing an even greater catastrophe from unfolding after everything else has already been lost. 54 President Anwar Sadat of Egypt shocked the world in 1977 by becoming the first Arab leader to visit Israel and openly pursue peace after decades of conflict. His efforts eventually produced the Camp David Accords and a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, earning Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin the Nobel Peace Prize. Not everyone welcomed those decisions. On October 6, 1981, during a military parade in Cairo commemorating the Yom Kippur War, Islamist extremists infiltrated the parade unit. As military vehicles rolled past, the attackers jumped from a truck and opened fire directly at the reviewing stand. Sadat was killed while several others were wounded. His assassination stunned the Middle East and demonstrated the enormous risks faced by leaders willing to pursue reconciliation instead of continued war. Vice President Hosni Mubarak assumed the presidency and maintained Egypt's peace treaty with Israel despite enormous regional pressure. Sadat lost his life trying to replace decades of conflict with diplomacy. His death became a reminder that making peace can sometimes be far more dangerous than fighting wars. 55 Benazir Bhutto had already survived exile, imprisonment, and years of political turmoil before returning to Pakistan in 2007, determined to compete in democratic elections once again. As the first woman to lead a Muslim-majority nation, Bhutto had long represented both hope and controversy. She knew her life was in danger, yet she continued holding large public rallies despite repeated warnings. On December 27th, after addressing supporters in Rawalpindi, she stood through the sunroof of her vehicle to greet the crowd. Moments later, gunfire erupted, followed by a devastating explosion. Bhutto died from injuries sustained during the attack. Her assassination plunged Pakistan into political instability, sparked widespread unrest, and drew international concern about the country's democratic future. Investigations lasted for years, while questions surrounding security failures remained controversial. Budo believed leaders should remain visible among the people rather than hide behind walls. Tragically, the very openness that made her popular also exposed her to extraordinary danger. Her final campaign became one of the most consequential, unfinished elections in modern political history. 56 Isoroku Yamamoto understood the industrial strength of the United States better than almost anyone else in Japan. Although he planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, he privately feared that Japan could not win a prolonged war against America. In April 1943, American intelligence intercepted Japanese communications, revealing Yamamoto's inspection flight through the Solomon Islands. U.S. commanders organized one of history's most famous targeted military interception missions. American P-38 Lightning fighters flew an extraordinarily long-distance mission, locating Yamamoto's aircraft almost exactly on schedule before shooting it down over the jungle. Yamamoto was killed instantly. His death deprived Japan of one of its most talented naval strategists at a critical stage of the Pacific War. While Japan continued fighting for more than 2 years, replacing his experience and leadership proved impossible. Ironically, the man who had designed one of history's greatest surprise attacks ultimately became the victim of one of history's most precisely planned aerial ambushes. Timing had defined both his greatest victory and his final defeat. 57 Anne Frank never held political office, commanded an army, or passed a single law, yet her death profoundly changed how future generations understood one of history's darkest periods. After spending more than 2 years hiding with her family in a secret annex in Amsterdam, Anne was arrested by Nazi authorities in 1944. She was eventually transported through several concentration camps before dying of typhus at Bergen-Belsen in early 1945, only weeks before the camp was liberated. Her father, Otto Frank, survived and later discovered Anne's diary had been preserved. When it was published after the war, readers encountered the Holocaust through the honest, hopeful, and deeply human words of a teenage girl, rather than military reports or political speeches. The diary became one of the most widely read books in history, translated into dozens of languages, and studied by millions of students. Anne Frank never knew anyone beyond her family would read her private thoughts. Today, those pages continue speaking more powerfully than many governments ever have. 58 King Louis XVI of France probably never imagined that the execution platform built for him would become one of history's most famous symbols. After the French Revolution stripped away the monarchy's authority, Louis was tried for treason by the National Convention. On January 21, 1793, he was taken to the guillotine before a massive crowd in Paris. His execution transformed the French Revolution forever. Until then, many European monarchs still believed the revolution might eventually compromise with the royal family. After Louis died, those hopes disappeared. European kingdoms united against revolutionary France, beginning years of international warfare. Inside France, political radicalization accelerated, eventually leading to the Reign of Terror under Maximilien Robespierre. The execution also permanently weakened the centuries-old belief that kings ruled by divine right. One falling blade did far more than end a monarch's life. It shattered an entire political philosophy that had dominated Europe for generations. History has few moments when one execution changed the future of nearly every royal family on the continent. 59 John Lennon had already changed music forever as a member of the Beatles, but his death turned him into something even larger than a legendary songwriter. On December 8, 1980, Lennon returned to the Dakota apartment building in New York after a recording session. Waiting outside was Mark David Chapman, who had earlier obtained Lennon's autograph. As Lennon walked toward the entrance, Chapman fired multiple shots, fatally wounding him. News spread around the world within hours, leaving millions in disbelief. Fans gathered outside the Dakota, singing Beatles songs through the night while radio stations interrupted normal programming to report the tragedy. Lennon's death reignited conversations about celebrity security, gun violence, and the enormous emotional connection people form with artists they have never met. His music, promoting peace, imagination, and hope, reached new generations after his passing. Lennon often sang about giving peace a chance. Tragically, one of the 20th century's strongest voices for peace became another victim of senseless violence that echoed far beyond the sidewalk where it happened. 60. Nicholas Copernicus spent nearly his entire life quietly developing an idea that challenged humanity's understanding of the universe. For centuries, most scholars believed Earth stood motionless at the center of creation. Copernicus reached a radically different conclusion. The Earth and other planets orbit the Sun. Hesitant to publish such controversial ideas, he delayed releasing his masterpiece, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, until the very end of his life. According to long-standing tradition, a printed copy of the book reached him on the day he died in May 1543, when he was already gravely ill following a stroke. Whether every detail of that story is literally true remains uncertain, but historians agree the book appeared just before his death. Its publication ignited the scientific revolution, inspiring astronomers such as Kepler and Galileo, while eventually transforming physics, navigation, astronomy, and humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. Copernicus spent decades looking toward the heavens. It was only after his final breath that the world finally began looking at the universe through his eyes. 61. The death of Osama bin Laden on May 2, 2011, marked the end of one of the most extensive manhunts in modern history. Nearly 10 years after orchestrating the September 11th terrorist attacks, bin Laden was located inside a heavily fortified compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. U.S. Navy SEALs carried out a secret nighttime raid known as Operation Neptune Spear, killing him during the mission. His death did not end terrorism, but it represented a major symbolic and operational victory in the global fight against al-Qaeda. Intelligence recovered from the compound revealed valuable information about terrorist networks, communication methods, and future plots. Around the world, governments reassessed counterterrorism strategies, while millions watched the news unfold in real time. For many Americans, the announcement closed a painful chapter that had begun on a clear September morning a decade earlier. Yet history also showed that removing one leader does not automatically eliminate an ideology. Bin Laden spent years hiding from the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. In the end, secrecy simply delayed the inevitable rather than preventing it. 62. President Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt that changed modern emergency medicine and presidential security. But the man whose death truly transformed that story was White House Press Secretary James Brady. During the shooting outside a Washington hotel in March 1981, Brady was struck in the head, suffering devastating injuries that left him permanently disabled. Although he lived for more than 3 decades afterward, he never fully recovered. Brady dedicated the rest of his life to advocating stronger firearm regulations, eventually helping inspire the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, signed into law in 1993. When he died in 2014, medical examiners ruled his death a homicide because it resulted from the injuries he had suffered in the 1981 attack. His remarkable perseverance transformed him from a victim into one of the most influential advocates for gun policy reform in American history. Brady's legacy reminds us that history is sometimes changed not by the moment of violence itself, but by what survivors choose to do during the years that follow. His voice ultimately carried farther than the bullet ever did. 63. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, died violently in 1844, but his death unexpectedly strengthened the religious movement he had created. Smith was jailed in Carthage, Illinois, while facing charges connected to growing political and social tensions surrounding his followers. On June 27th, an armed mob stormed the jail and killed both Joseph and his brother Hyrum Smith. Many observers believed the movement would collapse without its charismatic founder. Instead, Brigham Young gradually emerged as the principal leader and guided thousands of Latter-day Saints westward across the American frontier to the Salt Lake Valley. That migration permanently shaped the settlement of the American West and led to the development of modern Utah. Smith's death transformed him into a martyr in the eyes of believers, strengthening their commitment during years of extraordinary hardship. History repeatedly demonstrates that movements built around powerful ideas often survive the loss of their founders. In this case, one mob attack helped create a religious community that continues to grow nearly 2 centuries later. 64. The death of Soviet nuclear physicist Igor Kurchatov in 1960 did not make dramatic newspaper headlines outside the Soviet Union, but its long-term consequences were significant. Often called the father of the Soviet atomic bomb, Kurchatov directed the scientific effort that allowed the Soviet Union to develop nuclear weapons years earlier than many Western analysts expected. His leadership fundamentally altered the balance of power during the Cold War by ending America's temporary monopoly on nuclear arms. Kurchatov later became a strong advocate for the peaceful use of nuclear energy and increasingly warned about the dangers of nuclear testing. When he died suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 57, Soviet science lost one of its most respected voices. His absence came during a period when nuclear technology was expanding rapidly across both military and civilian sectors. Kurchatov spent much of his career helping build the most destructive weapons humanity had ever created. Ironically, his later years were devoted to encouraging the world to use scientific knowledge far more carefully than politicians often preferred. 65. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 became one of the most painful turning points in the modern history of the Middle East. Rabin, a decorated military commander turned statesman, had shocked many people by pursuing peace negotiations with the Palestine Liberation Organization. Together with Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for the Oslo Accords. On November 4th, after speaking at a peace rally in Tel Aviv, Rabin walked toward his car believing the evening had been a success. Instead, an Israeli extremist, opposed to the peace process, stepped forward and shot him at close range. Rabin died shortly afterward in hospital. His assassination deeply divided Israeli society and dealt a severe blow to the already fragile peace negotiations. Many historians continue to debate how differently the peace process might have evolved had Rabin lived. He survived decades of war only to be killed while trying to prevent another one. Few deaths better illustrate how difficult peace can be to protect once violence becomes politically acceptable. 66 Neil Armstrong's death in 2012 reminded the world that some people become larger than history itself. On July 20, 1969, Armstrong became the first human being to walk on the moon, delivering words that would be remembered for generations. The achievement represented far more than one astronaut stepping onto another world. It symbolized scientific ambition, technological innovation, and the determination of an entire generation during the space race. After leaving NASA, Armstrong deliberately avoided celebrity, choosing a quieter life as an engineer, professor, and businessman. When complications following heart surgery led to his death at the age of 82, tributes came from presidents, astronauts, scientists, and ordinary people across the globe. His family encouraged people to honor his memory by simply looking up at the moon and giving him a wink. Armstrong spent only a few hours walking across the lunar surface, yet those footprints permanently changed humanity's understanding of what was possible. Sometimes history's greatest journeys begin with a single careful step into the unknown. 67 few deaths have reshaped an entire civilization more profoundly than that of Jesus of Nazareth. Around AD 30, after being arrested in Jerusalem, Jesus was tried under the authority of the Roman governor Pontius Pilate and sentenced to crucifixion, a punishment commonly used by Rome for criminals and rebels. His execution seemed, at least to many observers at the time, like the end of a small religious movement centered on one teacher from Galilee. Instead, it became its beginning. His followers proclaimed that he had risen from the dead, a belief that became the foundation of Christianity. Over the following centuries, that movement spread throughout the Roman Empire and eventually across every continent, profoundly influencing art, philosophy, law, literature, education, politics, and culture. Regardless of individual religious belief, historians agree that the death of Jesus stands among the most influential events in human history because of the extraordinary global impact it produced. One execution outside the walls of Jerusalem changed not only the course of religion, but also the development of civilizations for nearly 2,000 years. History rarely changes with a warning. More often, it turns in a single, unexpected moment when one life ends and millions of others begin moving in a different direction. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove reality is often stranger than fiction.